The Deathslinger is my favorite killer, so let it be known that I am pretty biased when I say that Mr. Caleb Quinn should move at a base speed of 4.6 meters per second. This would be a simple change to make him less frustrating to play at all levels while allowing him to keep pace with the rest of the game, no pun intended, due to his high-risk kit with zero mobility and limited range. One of the first arguments that I've seen raised against this is that having the killer at 4.6 would only encourage players to zone with M2 more than ever before, which takes away from the skill of playing Deathslinger correctly. I personally believe that changes that add to a character's general quality of life should not be gatekept, and that M2 zoning is an issue already with 4.6 killers, and it changes nothing here. In fact, I think that Deathslinger's relatively low movement speed forces him to zone more due to how punishing it is to miss a spear now. But to fully understand why Caleb moves at 4.4 meters per second presently, we should look at the other killers that have the same movement speed value and point out the common thread between most of them. And those killers are Wraith, Hag, Spirit, Huntress, Chucky, and the Dark Lord when he's in vampire form.
It's false. No way. Not this time. We created it. Not this time. No.
What I see with this lineup is a collection of killers that excel at closing distance with their powers with immediate effects. If we ignore the ones that have wicked mobility in their kits, we have Hag and Huntress. Hag's speed I generally attribute to her ability to teleport across the map and to make camping strategies at least a little difficult. Huntress, despite not having a dash or movement ability, is by far the most consistent killer at range, and her ability to 2-tap people with hatchets is unmatched. She needs to be a 110% movement speed killer because her power is strong enough to make up for her slower speeds. In other words, given what all these killers have in common, I hypothesize that behavior designates killers to move at 4.4 meters per second as a way to curtail the strength that is found in their unique powers. Then again, that hypothesis goes out the window. We consider that Billy, the Ghoul, and Mr. Talbot Grimes all move at 4.6 meters per second anyway. The other aspect that these killers largely have in common is that they're all older killers, well, mostly older killers, meaning that behavior possibly saw this as a way to balance the mobility from some of the earlier characters, but have since largely phased out this method of balancing. Chucky was actually the first killer since Deathslinger to move at 4.4 meters per second, so whatever way you cut it, killers that move at 110% of the base survivor run speed have a power that they can use to catch survivors out of position and follow up on that initial hit rapidly. Stealthiness also seems to be a secondary factor in this regard, in between Wraith's Shroud, Hag's sometimes imperceptible traps, Spirit's invisibility, and so on. Hag is also a 24 meter tear radius killer, giving her some added stealthiness. Deathslinger also used to have a 24 meter tear radius, but even more aggravating was his near instant ADS time, which made playing against the guy a living nightmare. With both of these aspects, and considering how his harpoon travels up to 18 meters away at 40 meters per second, it was reasonable at the time to make him 110% movement speed. And to put this into hard numbers, with a tear radius of 24 meters and a maximum range of 18 meters, you only had to clear 16 meters of tear radius before you were in range of a survivor. And at 4.4 meters per second, Caleb would clear that 6 meters in 1.36 seconds. Add in the 0.45 seconds it takes with a spear to travel max distance, and not adding any time for ADSing because it was pretty much instant, and the survivor could be speared within 1.81 seconds of hearing the Deathslinger's tear radius. Considering that the spear stuns you and rudely interrupts your actions for a few seconds while dragging you away, I can definitely see how playing against this killer was, and to some extent probably still is, annoying to play against. In a patch that was released in 2021, a year and a half after Slinger's release, his power was nerfed so that he couldn't immediately ADS, and his tear radius was bumped up to the standard 32 meters. Instead of having to travel a measly 6 meters to be in range, Deathslinger now has to travel 14 meters to get into the range of survivors, which takes 3.18 seconds. And since he can no longer quickscope survivors at range, we have to factor in the new ADS time of 0.4 seconds, plus the travel time of the Spirit max distance, which is still 0.45 seconds. In other words, if the Deathslinger is making a beeline for the survivor, the soonest that they can get speared is within 4.03 seconds of hearing the tear radius. That's over double of what it was initially. In the last 4 years since this patch, Slingers received 2 buff patches, one which reduced the reload time from 2.75 seconds to 2.6, and the other was the one where the stun duration was reduced, reeling speed was increased, and movement speed while reloading was also increased, each of which had compensatory nerfs to the add-ons that correlated to these changes. The patch that brought about these changes was the anniversary patch that included the release of Vecna 10 months ago, in which time over half of the roster has received some form of balance change themselves. Some killers have even been revisited multiple times. And the game has obviously changed dramatically in the last 4 years, but there have been some fundamental changes that have gradually chipped away at the efficacy that this killer once had, and especially in the last 10 months. Deathslinger's weakness was the most apparent during the 2v8 event, and that is that despite him having both reload add-ons added as a base kit solution to his power, he is one of the slowest at dishing out injuries. This is entirely due to how the primary mechanic in his power, the chain, works. I mentioned this before in my video of what is Deathslinger good at, but the chain being able to pull survivors away and isolate them from resources is a positive component of his power. It makes him incredibly strong in close range 1v1s, but the caveat is that it costs him a lot of time. Survivors have at least 4 seconds to move when they hear the terror radius before they're in any immediate danger, giving them plenty of time to pre-run, a strategy that is extremely effective against him. Let's say that someone sticks around though, and the Deathslinger spears them at the maximum distance of 18 meters. Now the cowboy has to start reeling, which takes 6.52 seconds from 18 meters to 0, at which point he has to break the chain or hit them with an M1, both of which force him to suffer a 2.7 second cooldown. In other words, every time the Slinger spears somebody at long range, it will take around 8 to 9 seconds before it can take another action. Reloading takes another 2.6 seconds to complete, bumping that maximum timer from 9.22 to 11.82 seconds to get 1 damage state and to be prepared for the next one. Obviously, these numbers do not include potential misses, nor the time that it takes to catch up to the survivor again after they start running. The shorter range shots might be able to compensate for some of this, but I'm trying to injure survivors as quickly as possible, and closing the distance to be within the range of a more guaranteed shot takes longer than taking the shot as early as possible. Even without accounting for his slower movement speed, Deathslinger already has to spend significant time getting a single survivor down. It's not terrible considering that could be off far worse, and heck, he could be the Skull Merchant, and I'm grateful that he isn't. But when we compare this relative slowness to his contemporaries in the 110% movement speed category though, Slinger is by far the worst off when it comes to the speed at which he gets that first hit and the speed with which he can follow up. And now for the changes in the last 10 months. Let's start off with the 2 survivor perks that have been released that affect Slinger the most: Finesse and Shoulder the Burden. When it comes to the prototypical survivor build that anchors itself around windows of opportunity and life, Finesse has become the undisputed cornerstone that holds the structure together. This perk in particular makes it more difficult for Slinger to get shots through windows, as the survivor will vault faster and have the option of crouching on the other side more readily available to them. From what I have observed, when a survivor vaults through a window, their hitbox does not follow the animation, but rather follows the lateral movement through the structure. So what ends up happening then is that if the Deathslinger fires a shot at an angle too far ahead of the hitbox's true position, the shot will clip through the survivor's model, which becomes even easier to do by mistake when Finesse is in play. Combine Finesse with an already decent pairing with Lithe and Windows, and not only will the survivor incidentally outpace a Deathslinger, but they'll be able to run him to pallets more readily too. Shoulder the Burden is admittedly a bit rarer than Finesse, but it changes the pace of the game for Deathslinger more than most other killers that can be considered his contemporaries. The big weakness of Shoulder the Burden is the fact that it leaves the rescuer exposed for 40 seconds, which should be a big flag for any killer to book it over to the hook as quickly as possible. But we have already discussed that survivors that are healing under hook have 4 seconds of warning before they have to move away, and if this Shoulder the Burden user has an exhaustion perk that allows them to maintain chase, they have pretty effectively slowed down the game. You see, Deathslinger is a killer that excels in dealing with survivors one at a time, but he has to commit a decent amount of time into doing so. By removing a hook state, Shoulder the Burden effectively nullifies all the time that he has spent spearing, reeling, meleeing, and reloading to get that survivor onto the hook by spreading that pressure between multiple targets. And another one that might surprise you is the re-emergence of the perk Vigil, which allows oneself and allies within 16 meters to recover from various status effects 40% faster including exhausted. This then means that if someone is running the infinite vault build that you've seen a billion times on YouTube, then the most status effects that Slinger can inflict have reduced durations while also making life more readily available. Another change that slightly affected Deathslinger in this patch with the Tokyo Ghoul is the reduction of the time of Deep Wound Men timers, which also makes it so that he's a lot slower at being able to maintain his pressure, and you can see where everything dominoes out from here. In the case of both former perks though, Deathslinger being 115 gives him a better chance of traversing the map to shore up the time that he loses otherwise. For Finesse, being able to clear corners sooner to make a more head-on shot on a window gives his kit a bit more needed lethality. Meanwhile, with Shoulder the Burden, the only way that Slinger can make his way back to that hook is by walking over there, so a slight boost in his movement speed might help him make up for the lost time that the perk contributes to. It also would make him a lot less frustrating to play around most power loops, as his lowered movement speed does not compensate for how precise he has to be. Each of the killers in the 110 category has the ability to nullify loops by employing greater mobility built into their base power, with the exception of Huntress, whose hatchets have indefinite range until the trajectory arc either leads into the ground or an obstacle. Huntress also has 7 hatchets before she has to reload, each of which deal a damage state without exception. Her directionless lullaby has a radius of 45 meters before giving way to a 20 meter terror radius, and she only takes 3 seconds to reload 7 shots compared to Deathslinger's 2.6 seconds for 1. Granted, she does have to locate a locker, but her threat is far more consistent and warrants being a 110 killer. And Chucky, although the nerfs have made him feel significantly weaker, does have the benefit of mobility on a relatively low cooldown that can also down survivors. Spirit has consistently been one of the best killers in the game due to her ability to trick survivors and use superior speed to catch up to them. Hag has the ability to cross-map teleport and lock down entire sections of a map at the time, and is one of the killers that is least affected by the perk Shoulder the Burden, in my opinion. And so this segment isn't all to say look at how much better every other killer has it, but rather to point out that when a killer has a movement speed value that is lower than the standard 4.6 meters per second, it's because their power is strong enough to compensate for it in some way. For pre-nerf Deathslinger, the compensation was that smaller tear radius and near instant ADS time. At least that's what I like to tell myself, because Hillbilly and Blight are both 115 killers despite their constant lofty status. The Deathslinger does not have a power that is fast or consistently strong enough to warrant his status as a 4.4 killer. I played a random game of the Blood Moon event just to test how things went, even with add-ons, and in this game my fastest down was 15.35 seconds. My average chase that always ended at least one down survivor lasted 22.57 seconds. These numbers included the time it takes to reload or recover from a stun, which added 2.25 and 2.0 seconds respectively to the various chase attempts, since I was running Warden's Keys and Cigar at the time. Does this mean that I suck with Deathslinger? Yeah, probably, but his power still raises the issue that he feels so heavily reliant on good add-ons and perks to shore up how sluggish he can feel at times. Base kit missing 5 shots in one match costs Slinger 20.85 seconds, or roughly a quarter of a generator done by a lone survivor with no perks. Nearly 21 seconds of doing quite literally nothing, spread out across multiple generators and healing attempts, causes this killer to fall behind significantly if he's inaccurate, and it only gets worse when you consider that he moves at a sluggish 4.4 meters per second. Now let's add survivor movement into the equation along with my own playstyle. I generally feel confident in landing shots of up to around 10 meters in distance, but if I miss, the spear will still travel the full distance. Here I will aim and fire as soon as my spear is ready, but because of a slight overcorrection, my shot misses and takes that dreaded 1.17 seconds to return to me. That is 0.45 seconds to travel the max distance going out, and then it comes back at 25 meters per second for 0.72 seconds. During the time it takes me to raise my weapon, the survivor can travel 1.6 meters in a straight line away from me, and then 4.68 meters as the shot returns to me. Choosing to reload here would be a mistake, but if I were to reload, it would take me 2.6 seconds, during which time I move at 3.08 meters per second, while the survivor of course retains their 4 meters per second sprint away, gaining an extra 2.67 meters during the reload timer. This gives the survivor a total of 8.95, or we'll just round to 9 meters, of distance for every missed shot and reload, provided that we're both moving in straight lines. Now, this is rarely the exact case, but I don't want to sit here all day going over extra hypotheticals. So if I'm taking shots at 10 meters or further away, this means that a survivor can go from 10 meters to nearly 19 meters away from me, which is now outside of my maximum harpoon range, and I only gain on them at an extra 0.4 meters per second if I want to complete a foot chase. Closing those 9 extra meters that I've given the survivor for being trash at this killer takes 22.5 seconds. So if Deathslinger was a 4.6 killer, this goes down to 15 seconds, which is a bit more manageable since DPD is a time management game and every second counts. This is what I mean when I say that Slinger's kit is high risk, in the sense that so much time is lost for misusing the power, and potential for misusing the power is so incredibly high. Yet at the same time, when faced with narrow loops like the giant rocks on Macmillan, Slinger isn't able to use his power nor catch up with the survivor as quickly, resulting in even more time lost. And in these situations, you're not encouraged to use your power because it would just slow you down and extends the chase out even further. Additionally, Deathslinger's form of mobility across the map is basically just jogging to where he has information and then hoping that he doesn't miss. 4.6 would be just slightly faster jogging. And like I said, in the 10 months since Deathslinger was buffed, 20 other killers have also received buffs or nerfs, with some of them being completely game-changing. This is admittedly only half of the DBD roster, and there are some killers that really need some love nowadays that haven't seen a change in over a year. Regardless, I think that 10 months is a pretty long time, and in that time we've seen finesse and shoulder the burden added, we've seen the hook timer go up by 10 seconds across the board per hook stage, we've had Ormond lose its only good trick shot, and we've seen Skull Merchant get taken out back, shot twice, and then offered a voucher for free plastic surgery. There has been too much that has changed in the game for Deathslinger to be further punished for the state that he was released in, and I think a suitable change to alleviate the increasing pressure of the game itself, alongside his ruthlessly precise kit, would be to give him 5% more movement speed. And to fix some add-ons, but we can do that another time. Thank you for listening to my essay, and goodbye.